Housing market crash videos have been a dime a dozen for the past 5 years. I recently received a comment on one of my housing market crash videos, and it really made me reflect and think about some things. So in this video, I want to have an honest conversation about the potential of a housing market crash. Will we actually see a housing market crash? What does that look like? And as a buyer, does it make sense to buy a home right now? Before the pandemic, I was starting to see videos about the potential for a housing market crash. And when I started to see those, I really didn't understand why people were making these videos because I felt like the housing market was pretty healthy and I really didn't see any signs of a housing market crash. Then the pandemic hit. People were starting to double down. They're like, see, I told you there was a housing market crash coming. But of course, none of these people could have predicted that there was a pandemic coming and that was going to make it so there was going to be a housing market crash. And then of course, the pandemic didn't cause a housing market crash. It made a housing market boom. And because of this boom, then people were concerned that there was going to be a housing market crash. If you look at the housing market right now, generally speaking, it's a seller's market. There are still more buyers than there are sellers. Now, it's not the same as it was 2 or 3 years ago when there were 30 offers over asking price, things like that. There are still some areas where we are seeing that, or at least some degree of that. However, we're seeing some areas where there is less demand. I think a good case study is Austin, Texas. If you look at a place like Austin, they started to really boom during the pandemic. And also they were probably set up for this boom because they have a good amount of new construction. There are new businesses that are coming to the area, tech companies, things like that. So they were kind of ready for some sort of boom. And then the pandemic happened. People were trying to look for other places to live. Austin was one of the top choices to move. And because of that, home prices started to rise and rise very quickly. And this was one of the most competitive markets in the US. If you look at the home prices in Austin and what they're trending at right now, there's been a pretty consistent decrease in home prices. Demand isn't what it once was, obviously. So what I wonder sometimes is when we reflect on the housing market in 10, 15, 20 years, are we going to see maybe not a national housing market crash, but they're going to say that there was certain areas where it's considered that they had a housing market crash, like maybe in Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Boise, Idaho. These are all places that saw a major price increase and then the brakes pumped quickly at a point and we started to see housing prices go down significantly. But when you look at the overall national statistics, prices are still rising. Maybe not as fast as they were, but regardless, prices are still on the rise. So if prices are still increasing, that tells me that demand is still there for people to buy homes. So based on that information, it makes me think that no, maybe we won't have a national housing market crash. However, I'm really hesitant to say, oh no, there's not going to be a housing market crash at all. It's not going to be a problem. You're good. Go buy a home. I think that's bad advice because if you look at the economy, it's not very stable. Inflation is still not under control. It's better than what it was, but it's still not great. The job market is in a pretty good spot, but there are a lot of questions on what the future of jobs look like. There are definitely companies that are letting people go, which is always a concern. If you get let go, will you be able to get a job quickly again and not have any issues with paying your bills? Obviously, the economy and what's going on within the economy directly affects real estate. Since I'm not convinced that we're not going to have some sort of recession or downturn, I don't really want to say, hey, we're out of the clear, we're not going to have a housing market crash, we're good. But with all that being said, I think there would have to be a really drastic event happen for there to be a real estate crash. And basically, it comes down to supply and demand. Right now, there's still more demand to buy homes than there are homes available, like I mentioned earlier. Now, I'm talking more at a national level. I do realize that there are some places where that's not the case. We're not seeing home prices increase there. We're actually seeing decreases and homes are staying on the market for longer. However, generally speaking, we're still seeing that it's a seller's market. There's just not enough homes out there. Housing starts are starting to pick up, but builders aren't building at this rapid pace like they were before the 2008 housing crash. I think builders kind of learned their lesson. They're trying to be a little more conservative and not overextend themselves because I think they do know that the economy is unpredictable and it's very possible that there could be some sort of crash or downturn. And I think that's one of the main reasons why builders aren't building as fast as they used to. Also, the cost of materials because of inflation has made it more difficult for builders to make as much profit as they did before. Ultimately, this supply versus demand issue has shielded us against a crash. So I think the question is, when do we get more inventory? I think there are a few different thoughts on how we get inventory. Some people think that there's going to be a bunch of foreclosures and we'll get inventory that way. There's also a thought that baby boomers will start to sell their homes at a rapid pace. And then, of course, there's new construction. Ultimately, the amount of homes that we need to fulfill the demand is a lot. So we would probably need all three of these things to happen to really cool off demand. I'm not confident that our supply versus demand issue will be fixed anytime soon. Now, I know some people might think that some of the situations that we have going on right now very much mirror what happened in 2008. In some sense, there is when you look at the state of the economy and things like that, but a major difference is the regulatory changes that happened after the 2008 crash. So because of those changes and how they've made it where it's more difficult to get mortgages, if there were to be a housing market crash, I don't think it would be for the same reason that we had a crash in 2008. Ultimately, what I'm thinking right now is if there is a crash, it would probably be related to some sort of big economic downturn or major financial issue. Or I could even see a particular suburb of a city where maybe they have a housing market crash because maybe there was more demand for people to live there at a point, and then people started to pay these high prices and ultimately the homes don't hold their value. So my honest opinion is no. I don't think we're going to see a housing market crash. But again, I would hate to tell somebody, oh yeah, there's not going to be a housing market crash, no problem, buy a home, you're good. Because I don't think we're good, and it's not necessarily because of a housing market crash, but I think it's just based on affordability or lack thereof, and what future growth looks like in real estate. I think the next 10 years is going to be very difficult for real estate, certainly the next 5. So should you buy a home now? If you're in a financial spot where you can afford it, you're not overextending yourself, it could make sense for you to buy. But you also have to be very stable, in my opinion. So having a stable job, just being stable in life, knowing that you're going to live in the home for a long time, which I know that is sometimes really hard to gauge because life events come up. But if you don't really see anything happening in the future where you would have to move from your home in the next 10 years, then I think it does make sense for someone to buy a home. But know that you're buying at a time that you may not see a lot of financial growth in the home, and it's very possible that the price of the home could decrease. And for some people, it could decrease a significant amount, maybe 10 or 15%. That's why my thought is if you live in the home for 10 years, whatever's going to happen in the market is going to happen. And then you'll be in a decent enough spot in 10 years where you'd be able to sell the home. You'll have equity in it, you wouldn't be underwater in your mortgage, which means that you owe more on the home than what it's worth. So ultimately, buying a home right now is not for everybody. This is not the best opportunity for people to buy, regardless of a housing market crash or not. Basically, proceed with caution. 2024 could be a great time for first-time homebuyers to buy a home. Check out this video to find out why, or this video about what happens if the housing market crashes in 2024.